In the last 100 years, dark rides have gone from this to this. While a lot of technological development has influenced these changes, there's one invention that stands out. For almost 2/3 of the past century, a dark ride meant riding in a vehicle, facing forwards, as you passed by scenes and effects. The major developments in ride technology mostly focused on propulsion, evolving from water pulling or pushing your cart through the ride to complex chain systems and electric motors managed by early computers. But even by the mid-1960s, the ride vehicle almost always faced forwards. The first design to allow ride makers to control the rotation of vehicles independent of the ride's track also happens to be one of the most famous ride systems ever developed. When Walt Disney bought himself a couple electric train sets in December 1947, he went to the studio machine shop looking for help. He wanted to build a miniature landscape for the trains in the room adjoining his office. The man he recruited for the project was studio machinist Roger Broggie. After completing the electric train, Broggie helped Walt with the scale miniature train Disney eventually installed on his lawn. The next year, he was promoted to head of the studio machine shop. By January 1951, he was working on the Disneylandia concept, developing small, animated mechanical figures for Walt based on the designs of Ken Anderson. After establishing WED Enterprises at the end of that year, Walt asked Broggie to join his new venture. Their first project was Disneyland. 9 years later, the year was 1964. Walt Disney brought several attraction designs to the World's Fair in New York, to great fanfare. They were all so successful, Disney naturally wanted to bring them back to his theme park. At the same time, he was looking to revitalize one of the park's themed areas, Tomorrowland, because it had become outdated. Two of these World's Fair attractions, Ford's Magic Skyway, renamed the Wedway People Mover, and General Electric's Carousel of Progress, would find homes in this new version of Tomorrowland. But Walt still needed something to replace the Aluminum Hall of Fame. Sorry, my voice does that every time I say Aluminum Hall of Fame! The AHF was exactly what it sounds like, a showcase of the novel uses for aluminum in the modern world. When the park opened in 1955, it was still cutting-edge tech. A decade later, and odds were, you arrived at Disneyland in a car that now used aluminum instead of heavier steel in its body panels and maybe even the engine block. Walt already had a replacement in mind. In 1957, the Disneyland show had produced Our Friend the Atom. Since that program's debut, Walt talked about an idea for a ride that adapted the show's premise into the theme park. He wanted to shrink guests down to the size of an atom. In the decade between the park's debut and the World's Fair, Roger Broggie helped develop the ride mechanisms for the monorail and Matterhorn, the animatronics for the Tiki Room and Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and the ride system for the Magic Skyway. Walt wanted to bring all the attractions from the World's Fair back to Disneyland, but the Magic Skyway presented problems. First, the vehicles were all Ford cars and wouldn't fit with Tomorrowland's theme. Plus, the park already had Autopia. It didn't need another car attraction. Second, the track was too large to fit in the space intended. Lastly, the original had always been a prototype, and Walt knew it could be improved. One of the biggest ways to improve the Skyway was to increase its throughput, or how many riders it could cycle over time. The attraction regularly had lines lasting a couple hours, despite having a conveyor belt loading and unloading section to keep the vehicles in constant motion. Broggie, along with Imagineers Bob Gurr and Leland Adams, modified the Skyway into the People Mover. They improved the efficiency by replacing the large Ford road cars with trains of smaller, high-capacity cars. They improved the drive mechanism to make it more reliable and less prone to wear. They perfected the car spacing and programming, allowing the cars to accelerate faster and so fit more vehicles onto the track. Walt loved it so much, he implemented the ride system in vehicles as the main form of public transport for his Florida project, Epcot. Through the end of 1966, Broggie was again iterating on his previous design. With the help of Burt Brundage, he was toying with adapting the People Mover for Walt's Atomic Dark Ride. Their primary concern, once again, was throughput. They were impressed by the design of General Motors' rival exhibit at the World's Fair. While Disney and Ford focused on giving the experience of driving in a real car, very much limiting capacity for their ride, GM's Futurama 2 was more concerned with showing riders a vision of the future. Disney's ride was more thrilling since the cars changed speed at different points along the track. It could also climb and descend hills, while GM's track stayed flat. But for what it lacked in thrills, Futurama 2 managed a much, much larger capacity, using continuous trains of larger vehicles with seats 3 abreast. Back at Wet Enterprises, Broggie and Brundage started experimenting with a similar continuous train design. One constraint of the continuous train was that, unlike the Magic Skyway and People Mover, the new ride mechanism had to move at a single, continuous speed. But they did solve the problem of elevation changes by laying a guide rail along the track. With a simple linkage up to the ride vehicle, this guide rail allowed them to pitch the seats forwards and backwards over hills, keeping the rider upright at all times. The guide rail fix gave them another idea, one that would solve a perennial problem of dark ride design. In previous rides, it was impossible to control the guests' sight lines. The problem was simple. Every scene had a finite budget. The more space a designer incorporated into the scene, the more set dressing, matte backgrounds, lighting, and other costs ate into the budget for the main set piece. Since a rider's main view was always facing forwards, the entire track needed to turn to face riders towards scenes. Because of this, scenes often needed to be spread across both sides of the track, especially on straight sections, effectively splitting the budget for any scene in half. Broggie and Brundage realized they could use a second guide rail to control where guests looked. Where the first guide rail regulated pitch, the same motion could translate through clever gear ratios to control yaw. This allowed designers to rotate the train's cars towards and away from scenes. Combined with the ability to pitch the cars forward and back, Imagineers could now aim guests at a specific set piece. The entire ride mechanism was revolutionary enough, but while Broggie and Brundage perfected the ability to move the cars to face where they wanted, Bob Gurr gave them the vehicle design to sit atop their mechanism. He curved the walls of the car up and around the rider, encompassing them in the vehicle. This meant that if the rider looked away from the scene, all they would see was the inside of their own ride vehicle. He added stereo speakers above and around their heads, allowing audio cues to be played for individual cars of guests, and timed to the motion of their vehicle. While it may look incredibly simplistic by today's standards, the result was a game changer. Suddenly, a rider's point of view was beholden to the ride's designers. Because of the limited peripheral vision and the forced motion of the vehicles, Imagineers could tightly control what a rider saw, and more important, what they didn't see. This allowed them to hide more effects in plain sight, to repurpose old magician's tricks like the Pepper's Ghost, to create new effects never before seen in dark rides. But then, Walt Disney died of lung cancer. The Tomorrowland overhaul was still in development, as was the Florida project and the development of the Atomic Dark Ride, not to mention many other projects. The Imagineers soldiered on, their leader gone, trying to maintain the vision he had for the attractions currently in development. The first attraction to utilize the new ride system, dubbed the Omnimover by Bob Gurr, was Adventure Through Inner Space, presented by Monsanto. The ride, manufactured by Aero Development, did what Walt always wanted. It shrunk guests down to the size of atoms, allowing them to see the electrons and nucleus on a human scale. It was never the most popular attraction, even amongst its Tomorrowland update peers, the Carousel of Progress and the People Mover. It was, however, very, very effective at raising throughput. Because the ride rarely stopped, and the cars ran in a single, contiguous train around the entire track, new, empty ride vehicles were always available. Even a brief stop for a guest to transfer in or out of a wheelchair usually went faster than it did on most attractions. The ride's design, sets, and effects may not have been the most advanced, but it proved the value of the Omnimover system. The attraction the ride mechanism would come to be most associated with was the second implementation. The Haunted Mansion went through a long, difficult evolution before the Omnimover was even developed. As far back as 1951, before Wed Enterprises and Disneyland even existed, Harper Goff drew an idea for a haunted house attraction for Disney's Mickey Mouse Park. As the park evolved into Disneyland, the haunted house attraction was always on a back burner. In 1961, Wed began an expansion to Disneyland called New Orleans Square. The area was intended to have a pirate wax museum, a thieves market, and a haunted house. The haunted house's exterior was started in 1962 and completed in 1963. The entire area was put on hold when Walt got involved in the World's Fair. The pirate and haunted house attractions moved aside as the Magic Skyway, It's a Small World, and Carousel of Progress went through development. By 1966, the haunted house was still developing as Walt worked to finish the pirate ride, now evolved from a wax museum to the original Pirates of the Caribbean. After Walt's death, the Haunted Mansion, still conceived as a walk-through attraction, underwent even more changes. There are plenty of great videos out there covering the more in-depth history of the Haunted Mansion's development, so check those out if you haven't already and you want to know more. When Adventure Through Inner Space opened, it demonstrated how the Haunted Mansion could be effective while also allowing for a maximum number of guests to pass through. After more than a decade of development, all the ideas and concepts for the Haunted Mansion now had a ride system that could match them. When it opened in 1969, the Haunted Mansion drew record crowds. Unlike its predecessor, the extra time, budget, and conflict resulted in a final product that showed what dark rides were capable of becoming. The ride was so successful, it was included as an opening day attraction for the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World 2 years later, on October 1st, 1971. Less than a year later, in the same park, the third Omnimover ride opened. If You Had Wings, sponsored by Eastern Airlines, was a spiritual successor to Adventure Through Inner Space, presented by Monsanto. The ride used simple sets and projections to create scenes of travel destinations while a catchy song played. The ride was not very popular and functioned more as a 4.5-minute advertisement for Eastern than much of a ride. Compared to the Haunted Mansion and even Adventure Through Inner Space, the ride lacked any cohesive narrative, other than that riders should fly on Eastern Airlines. Helpful reservation agents stood at the ride's exit, ready to book flights for guests at a nearby Eastern reservation desk. It would be a decade before another Omnimover attraction opened, but when it did, it was not alone. 2 new Omnimover rides debuted on the same day, October 1st, 1982, with the opening of the third Disney park, Epcot Center. The park's iconic geodesic sphere contained one, Spaceship Earth. A quick quarter-hour-long trip through the history of human technological and communication evolution, Spaceship Earth acted as the unifying attraction for the celebration of progress in Epcot's future world, and the celebration of humanity in the World Showcase. Nearby in Future World, World of Motion, sponsored by GM, opened as well. Bearing a striking similarity to Spaceship Earth, World of Motion took guests through the history of travel, with a less reverent and more comedic tone than that of the park's icon. 3 more Omnimover rides would join Epcot's 2 opening day attractions over the following 4 years: Journey into Imagination, Horizons, and the Seas. Again, there are far more detailed videos on the development of these attractions available, but we'll touch on each one briefly. Journey into Imagination stands out for not just developing the Omnimover further, but using it to incorporate a carousel theater, much like the Carousel of Progress did at the 1964 World's Fair. The ride's concept, much more fantastical than the other Epcot Omnimovers, also set it apart. It was also the only Omnimover attraction to date with trains that stopped during loading and unloading. Horizons picked up where Spaceship Earth and World of Motion left off, transporting guests from the modern world into a future with robots, space tourism, and undersea living. The attraction's optimistic vision of the future made it a fan favorite, but the very nature of its futuristic setting gave it an expiration date. Like Journey into Imagination, it also offered a variation on the Omnimover formula by suspending the cars below the track, rather than having them sit above it. The Seas' Omnimover mainly served to show off the world's largest saltwater aquarium at the time. The track traveled through the center of the massive tank, offering guests a view from under the sea. More on that later. In addition to the Epcot attractions, Haunted Mansion clones using the Omnimover system opened in the Tokyo and Paris Disneyland parks when they opened, though the one in Paris is called Phantom Manor. By the 1990s, the Omnimover was beginning to be replaced by newer, more advanced ride systems. The last 2 series of attractions to use the Omnimover were the Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Astro Laser Blast Planet Rescue Spin and the Little Mermaid rides in California Adventure and Magic Kingdom. The former is notable for being the first Omnimover with vehicles that allowed the riders to turn the car themselves, and also innovated by adding laser guns to the cars. The Little Mermaid rides are similar to the Buzz Lightyear attractions in that they also use independent electric motors in each vehicle to rotate the cars, instead of the original guide rail of the older Omnimover systems. The Omnimover system has also been used outside of the Disney parks, in places like Hershey's Chocolate World, Kings Island, and Efteling in the Netherlands, though those are marketed under a different name by Aero Developments. While it seems the Omnimover's glory days are over, its influence is still visible in modern dark ride systems, like the trackless dark ride in Rise of the Resistance and the Kuka arm system of Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey. It's doubtful a major theme park will build another new Omnimover attraction, but some of the classic rides powered by this innovative system are sure to keep it around well into the future.